Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we have Bruna, the Fading Light, a commander and creature we were just talking about last episode. Before we get right into it, I think I need to note to everyone that if you're sending me deck lists, please take them off of private. I cannot see the deck list when you send it to me, and it is a private deck list. Yesterday I was going through my list and I had to cross off several decks because I just couldn't access them, and I can't really help you with your deck if I can't see it. If your deck was on private, I think it's best just to send it to me again because, or comment here, I guess, because I'm probably not going to go back and check through all of them. Do note, don't send it to private, and I do like Moxfield, but if you send it by anyways, I can just put the domain into the Moxfield deck builder and get the Moxfield deck. So don't worry too much about that. Okay. Administrative things aside, this is a deck that comes from Erica. She sent us this deck before and says that they've changed it up. She says, you might notice it's drastically different now, and it is. I found the aggressive self-mill strategy just wasn't working. This version plays more of a board-focused game and uses life gain and a slightly larger interaction suit to stay alive. Turns out a few flyers can actually win the game if it gets late enough. I'd like to hear your general thoughts on the change concept, as well as recommendations for permanent-based interactions, since my card knowledge in that area is a little sparse. Thank you so much for taking time to look at my deck again. Bruna is my baby, and I'm so happy to share. And she says, no infinite combos unless they are really cool. Absolutely, Erica. I'm very happy to take a look at this deck again. And from memory, this deck is rather different. I really did like the reanimation version of this deck, but this is definitely a stronger version. We've got quite a bit we can go over, so let's take a moment to take a look at our commander and get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Bruna the Fading Light, and why are they our mono-white commander? Bruna the Fading Light is a 7-mana angel horror. She has one ability that says, as you cast this spell, you may return target angel or human creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. She has flying vigilance, and she's a 5/7. Now, as noted before, this generally fits into more of a reanimator cell, but that's not what we're going with now. So she's just kind of gravy that you get a reanimation spell attached to a very big body in the command zone. 5/7 is nothing to sneeze at. That is 5 attacks to defeat an opponent, but as soon as you put an extra point in of power, that's 4 attacks, which is a big difference. And if you can put 2 extra points of power, that's 3 attacks, which is really, really keen that if you can slam her down, attack 3 times, take out any player. Of course, vigilance is also very, very strong. It is very hard to fight through Bruna. However, Bruna has a backside. If you get Gisela the Broken Blade, and at the, I believe it's at the end of turn, you have both, they will meld into Brisela, Voice of Nightmares. Brisela is a 9/10 Eldrazi Angel, flying first strike vigilance lifelink. Your opponents can't cast spells with mana value 3 or less, which tends to be their removal suite. Is really, really powerful as a creature and generally will win you the game. Now do note, this changes. I believe she continues to be your commander. I actually don't know that rule. I wonder if someone can tell me. If she continues to be your commander, because it's the backside of your commander, but the commander damage will not stack, so you'll have to start a new one with Brisela, which is still at 9 power, 3 attacks. Wouldn't mind adding 2 more power to her to make it 2 attacks, but she's such a beast to begin with that the game should be generally over. And worst case scenario, if she dies, you can just leave her halves into the graveyard and reanimate them by other means. Looking at the deck itself, I am very impressed with the general power level of it. Looking through, we've got 35 lands, 36 including MDFC with Shajiri Shelter. I might have another suggestion for MDFCs when we get to additions, but I'm generally happy with it. We have a nice collection of very powerful cards. We've got some nice guildless commons and Lotus Field to reduce the number of lands we have in play, allowing cards such as a Knight of the White Orchid to work and get us lands. This is something we touched on last episode, and I'm really happy to see it in play already here. Looking at our curve, we've got a very nice, generally low mana curve that kind of plateaus after 4 mana. And then at 13 mana, I believe it is Emrakul, yes. So this curve is very nice. We're very low to the ground for most of the game, and most of the stuff that we have higher mana is very, very impactful. That being said, and I know that it's weird to come back reverse from the last episode, but I actually wouldn't mind a few more 4 and 5 drops. It really feels like we fall off immediately, and 4 and 5 drops tend to be very impactful cards. I'm talking about things like, Smothering Tithe. I'm thinking about mass board wipes. I'm thinking about very powerful enchantments that shut down the game. It's worth occasionally having these bigger 5 mana cards, even if they are increasing our curve, because in the long run, we do want to have an element of, like inevitability. Now, as Erica has said herself, the deck already does have that level of inevitability. We've got a lot of very big drops. We've got from Avacyn, we've got Emeria Shepherd, which allows us to reanimate with planes. We've got down here, where is the Emeria Skyrune that also lets us reanimate when we have enough planes. We do have a very good setup. So generally, I do like it. Where I'm going to start picking at is where I believe the deck is starting to get a little, how do I put this? It's really strong and certain pieces feel like they're holding it back. So looking at the deck list itself, I feel a strong stacks kind of element to it. We've got cards like Ethersworn Canonist, we've got Archon of Emeria. These are little things that slow down our opponents. We've got good blink strategies. We've got ways to stop our opponents from getting ahead while we are moving forward to playing our land drops. And so I'm looking at cards that enable us to take advantage of that and not slow us down on that path, or not just kind of interfere with that path. So with that, because of the strength of the cards and the strength of the path, we're looking at really nitpicking the kind of cards that we have here. Starting with Ornithopter of Paradise. This just kind of really stands out to me as probably the weakest card in the deck. Don't get me wrong, I do understand it is a mana rock that can attack, and that's nothing, not nothing I should say, but it is pretty nothing here in a deck that's otherwise very, very tight. Something that's always worth noting with mana that is on 2 is that generally we want cards like this to help us get to 4. And with a deck that is so light on 4 mana, come over here, we've got just a few threats and almost cards, I should say, and almost all of them don't want to be ran out right away. Gisela is probably the only exception to this, because you do want to slam her down and start attacking. But Sarah Paragon, you definitely want something in your graveyard or something else to cast, so you generally don't want to just cast her on the first time you get 4 mana. Divine Reckoning, once again, you don't want to throw this out. And Court of Ardenvale. My goodness, my words are all over the place this morning. Court of Ardenvale is very good to slam out, but still, if you notice, there's a reanimation element to it, and we do really want more of a graveyard to do so. So all that to say, Ornithopter of Paradise isn't really catching my eye. And notably, we aren't playing any other traditional mana rocks. We're not playing Soul Ring. That might be just kind of a choice in terms of power level. We aren't playing any of the 2 mana rocks, and I think this is fine. Don't get me wrong, I think Soul Ring for sure could easily be put into the deck. I think Arcane, well, I guess we don't need Arcane Signet. Anything that taps for white is fine as well. But I do agree with the inclusion or the lack of inclusion of it, right? We're looking at things like we have Dowsing Dagger, we're looking at things to build towards Throne of Eldraine. We really don't want to be taking time off to play mana rocks when instead we could be playing, slightly stronger cards. Giada is our other kind of mana rock, quote unquote, but of course she is stronger, she attacks, just better. And I do understand that there's this kind of thing that we use Dowsing Dagger with the Ornithopter of Paradise, which is one of our early creatures that has evasion. I get that. I would just rather any other creature with evasion. This just feels particularly weak. Whereas Giada at least has vigilance, at least does something more for your angels, and grows your angels as they play. For example, whereas Gisela coming as a 5/4 is a big difference. Looking at a few others, Search for Glory as well is catching my eye as just being a little too weak at this point. I know generally like a tutor is something I do like, but this is a 3-mana tutor and it's in the same deck with Enlightened Tutor, so it definitely does feel weaker than the other parts of the deck. And then what are we searching for glory? Looking through our legendary list, we've got some cool ones. Loran is obviously very, very good here. Gisela can be fetched in order to do the combo. Lyra's just a beater. Avacyn's just great. Emrakul's good, sure. But even then, a deck like this, I don't generally think you're tutoring like that. I think you're generally using it, you want to be tutoring for the card that solves the problem that's in front of you, right? Because in order for you to search for glory for a beater, you have to be very, very far ahead. And maybe search for glory for a beater is not the right way of saying it. If you were tutoring, for example, and you had vampiric tutor magically, and you can tutor for anything, how often are you going to be tutoring for the search for glory, for like the Emrakul, sorry, versus something like the Ghostly Prison, the Divine Reckoning, the where is it? Aethersworn Canoness, the thing that shuts down your opponents or otherwise stops them from getting ahead is generally more valuable. Like Esper Sentinel, for example. Esper Sentinel as a card advantage engine is much more attractive to me than being able to pull Emrakul out of our deck, because generally we're going to get to Emrakul eventually, so why are we rushing in? And if we're in a situation that we're tutoring like that, we have to be ahead or so deep into neutral that we can spend 3 mana on this and then whatever 8 mana on Emrakul. Looking at this artifact enchantments, I think it's regular that you should be paying like 7 or 8 mana for Emrakul. So that's another card that kind of catches my eye that I'm a little less interested in. Looking at our artifacts, I think things like Altar of Dementia and Looking at artifacts, there's a few that kind of pop out at me as being not really worth the effort. I recognize they worked a lot better in the previous versions of the deck, but here they seem a bit weaker. Notably, I'm thinking of Perpetual Timepiece, which at this point is just an incredibly slow self-mill strategy, and half the time I think a very, very dead draw. So I don't particularly like this here anymore. Likewise, Smuggler's Copter is a card I have such a hard time with. I recognize this was a card that was once banned in Pioneer that has to speak to its power, but I don't think it's good. It's once again clunky to get out, you need another creature to crew it, and even then all you're doing is looting when it attacks or blocks. Notably, if you block with the Smuggler's Copter, 9 times out of 10, the Smuggler's Copter is dying, right? People aren't attacking into you with 2/2s when you have Smuggler's Copter out and an ability to crew it. They're attacking you with 6/6s. So if you are blocking with the Smuggler's Copter, you are then losing the Smuggler's Copter. And if that's the only time you've used the Looter Scooter, I believe it's been described as, that's a horrible deal. That's 2 mana, you put it into play, you have to tap down a creature, you have to block, and then you get to loot once. That's a lot of effort just to loot once, and I think it's not particularly good. Even if you get some kind of very strong start where you're like going turn 1 Esper, turn 1 Esper Sentinel is just so strong by itself. Let's say turn 1, you put out some kind of 1/1 that you're not going to use, and then turn 2, you play the Looter Scooter, Smuggler's Copter, and after that, every turn you attack. Even then, is that particularly worth the effort? And I don't know. Like, I would rather have paid 1 more mana for just repeated card draw, or much more realistically, I think Mask of Memory is just way better, and I think I would rather one of those, each opponent draws a card and you draw 3 cards kind of thing. There's a few of those kind of effects, like they're attacking your temple, I think is one of them. Those I like more for immediate card draw and card advantage. I'll probably put those in my additions. Okay, I added them, so we'll get to those a little later. But this is all to say that I don't particularly like these long form, looting systems in this deck as much anymore when we're lower on the reanimation plan, especially when we have such better options. From down here, we have the Collector's Vault, which not only will allow us to loot, but create a treasure token each time, which is just 1 mana when you do the math down each time, which I particularly do like, and it'll let us ramp up to our higher threats sooner. Likewise, Altar of Dementia, I think, does a better job. So does Palantir, does much better job as well, and can burn out our opponents. So all of that, I do think, is better than the pieces of Perpetual Timepiece and the Smuggler's Copter. I think the Reckoner Bankbuster is really, really close. I understand I understand the strength of this card. Don't get me wrong. I've seen what it does, and I've played it in on MTG Arena back in the day. I get it. But this is a clunky card. This requires so much mana and effort that I don't really love it. Like, comparing this to, I think, just easily Esper Sentinel, and maybe that's an unfair comparison, but comparing those two, I think, is just a dramatic difference of the work you have to do to make the Reckoner Bankbuster work. Like, just in theory, right? You're paying 4 mana, probably over 2 turns to draw your first card. Then you're paying 6 mana to draw 2 cards, and then you're paying 8 mana to draw 3 cards. After that, you actually can't continue to pay mana for cards, which I think is a particularly bad thing, though you start getting treasure tokens. You get treasure tokens instead. Hold on, no, you don't. You get to only use it 1 more time, right? This card is even worse. I guess I've never used it 3 times and never realized at a certain point you just can't do things anymore because it's a part of the cost to remove the counter. Yeah, this is awful. Don't play this. It's such an effort for cards that I would rather just have a beater instead of putting together this very strange engine that requires so much work to get going. Okay, looking down here, I wanted to take a moment just talking about Mana Rocks. I was going to say this and I wanted to come back. This is one of the best decks I've seen that gets to play Throne of Eldraine, and I really, really do like that. And partially because of that, I do miss the inclusion of Sol Ring, and I do miss the inclusion of maybe 1 or 2 Mana Rocks, just for the purpose of powering this card out, because this card is just very, very strong. Its ability to tap for 4 for the majority of cards in our deck is fantastic, and the fact that it is card advantage in a color that sorely needs it is also really, really nice. So having access to this, I think I would appreciate more ways to get it into our hand, to get it onto the battlefield. Now, we're limited in those ways, but I will say Search of Glory is not the card that gets us there. So still very, very cool, and maybe Sol Ring, maybe something else to get it. Just, it's on my mind and I wanted to point it out. Looking at our enchantments, I'm generally happy with that. I think cards like Spectral Steel are starting to show their lack of power. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting to take it out, but we're getting close, right? Spectral Steel used to be really, really good when the deck was far more all in on the reanimation and self-mill plan. Now it's kind of getting cuter, where if it has a pseudo flashback ability, and that pseudo flashback ability allows us to get it back. But if we go and look at our list, we've got 1, 2, 3. We've got 3 equipment pieces that I've quickly seen, and then we need auras. So 1, 2. I can't count itself. So 1, 2. Okay. So 3. So we've got about 6 targets in the entire deck that Spectral Steel can actually do anything for. So we're basically playing this fairly as a enchant creature gets +2/+2 a good percentage of the time. And though I started this video off of talking about our commander and how much stronger she gets once we put that +2/+2 on her, this is not the way I wanted it to happen. With that in mind, I think this is a very, very easy cut. Should we go back towards more of an equipment or a much heavier mill version? And I'm talking about a deck that aims to mill half of its deck or more. Maybe Spectral Steel gets better. Even then, I don't think Spectral Steel is enough because just the lack of targets is particularly bad. Should you rebuild this deck with a much more intense aura equipment kind of theme to it, perhaps it'll get better. Here, I don't know. I don't think so. Ghostly Prison, likewise, a card that I struggle with. I think here is fine. I don't love the fact that it's hitting our 3s, which is where most of our cards are. And a lot of our 3s are just so much better. So much better than Ghostly Prison, especially when our other 3s, including Grasp of Fate, will just allow us to deal with the problems rather than playing Ghostly Prison and looking at our opponents and going, do you want to pay 2? And when I'm asking my opponents in mono white if they want to pay the 2, it's on Smothering Tithe, it's not on Ghostly Prison. So this is just coming off as rather weak. I do want to note that I have that bias against this card that I don't particularly like it, but for me, it's a cut and replace with removal. Coming into a little further, Smuggler's Share, I really do like it, but I do want to note that when we don't have our own ways of triggering this, it gets a little trickier. For example, we're not playing Path of Exile. We'll get back to that, but if we were, or Path to Exile, that could allow us to get an opponent to play 2 or more lands, getting us a treasure token. For example, I really like Smuggler's Share in my Bruna deck because Bruna gets people drawing extra cards, so that Smuggler's Share is almost guaranteed to allow us to draw multiple cards per turn cycle. When you are fairly playing Smuggler's Share, you will not always get the benefits for it. And I have played this card long enough to know that if you are not enabling it yourself, you are definitely not taking advantage of it. So I like it, don't get me wrong, but I think it is on the list of, I need to know what your meta's like, and if your meta doesn't very strongly support this, it's not very, very good. That being said, if your meta includes someone who has a group hug deck, any like Howling Mine ability, especially doubled up, is just insane with Smuggler's Share, to the point that I think you'll be drawing, upwards of 4 or 5 cards per turn cycle, and that's just off of this card and the group hug stuff, that it might actually become a bit of a threat to you because you are self-mill and your deck will run through itself incredibly quickly. Let's see. The Eldrazi Conscription, I'm having a hard time with this. I understand why it's in here. I understand that it's very, very good. I don't know. I wish it was something else, honestly. I do want it to be just maybe a smaller equipment or enchantment that allows you to get to the 8 mana rather than something to do with the 8 mana. Even with the small list of high mana cards, and we've talked about this, that the list of high mana cards is particularly low, I just have a bunch of cards I'd rather be playing or casting out around that time. Emeria Shepherd as a pseudo 8-drop because you need 7 mana and then you want to play the land after. So she's like 8 mana, and I'd rather play her every single time rather than the Eldrazi Conscription. Likewise, Avacyn, of course. Likewise, Emrakul, who is probably 8 mana or higher. I'd much rather play them than the Eldrazi Conscription every single time. That being said, it is flavorful, it is fun, but I think at this level of power in this deck, we've got better threats. After that, before we go to the additions, the last things I want to kind of nitpick are there's just a few creatures here that are probably just a little weak or a little on the weaker end. Something like Lyra Dawnbringer is really starting to hit her limit of being a good creature here. Last video, I talked about the strength of Lyra. Here, we have to admit Lyra has a ceiling. Playing her as a pretty fair 5/5 flyer, first strike lifelink, it's good, but at a certain point, you're going to be expecting your opponents to have removal. And if we are playing her as the game is kind of ground out, no one's ahead, I'm going to drop something and win the game, it might as well be Lyra, I would then suggest your commander is way better for that, because you're basically putting 2 bodies on the field, or any of the other huge drops are just as good. Lyra is just starting to become too weak for this kind of setup. Whereas Archangel of Thune, and I do understand the lifelink works very, very well with Archangel of Thune. Archangel of Thune, I think, is getting also to the limit because I really like this card, but I really prefer her in a go wide deck and not so much a go tall deck, because that second ability is very dependent on having a wide board and is so strong on a wide board that it really does feel like we're not taking advantage of her sheer strength. Though I will say, and this is extremely important, that I love the art on this card. I wish we had more angels with this kind of like coloration on their wings. It gives a nice kind of look and really gives that Innistrad vibe that I really, really do appreciate, where things are just a little more natural, bestial, and not so glamorous, especially with Avacyn gone. All right, let's go into additions. So I added here the first three are going to be the card draw engines that we can play with white. I think these have fallen out of favor a little bit. At least I don't hear people talking about them as much. That might be because they were all printed kind of in a row and they were the talk of the town. And now, not so much. I will note all of these target these cards that allow your opponents to draw cards for you to draw cards work really, really well with that Enchantment Smuggler share. So even there, I do like them. Each of these cards have a different benefit. I wouldn't play all three. I would consider playing one or two. Your Temple is under attack. I think right now in this version of the deck is the strongest one, because it either is a divination for you and an opponent, or it is going to give your creatures indestructible. And considering that your creatures are probably going to die by board wipe more often than anything else, this is the one that I do want to play. So I think this one is very, very strong. Going to the next one, Cut a Deal. This is my personal favorite because drawing each opponent one card rather than drawing a single opponent two cards is preferred. However, you lose the political angle and you are forced to just give all opponents a card, including probably the one who's the furthest ahead. However, this draws you 3 cards, which I prefer way more. The idea of how you spread out these cards being important is a strategy idea, but also when it comes down to it, you're probably going to have to work with what you have. But for me, draw 3 for 3 is much better than draw 2 for 3, even if there is more of a perk for my opponents. Finally, on that same last note, Secret Rendezvous is kind of the same card, except for instead of spreading it, it goes to one opponent, and it costs an extra white pip. I do really, really like the idea that you can use this politically, and I know it's a very polarizing card. I do just want to note it can be very, very strong. So your mileage will vary, but at its ceiling, it's very, very good, and at its floor, it's draw 3 for 3 when you're looking for a board clear, especially when you're like, if we don't get a board clear, we lose. That gives you 2 targets, you and an opponent, to draw a board clear or some kind of interaction. So I like that. I also think this art is exceedingly cute. Going into the first batch of additions is going to be kind of stacks oriented. And I think stacks has this kind of reputation that I don't think it's deserved, where it's just unbelievably bad and awful and nobody will like you. It is part of White's color pie, and you need to be taking advantage of the color pie you are given, especially as decks get to higher power levels. And I don't think any of these cards, well, I don't think most of these cards are particularly contentious, and I think they are worth playing. Deafening Silence is definitely one I just want to note, especially you are lower on non-creature spells, and I would say with the cuts I've said, you're probably going down more. This card is just really, really good. At 1 mana, you throw this down, and you get to kind of take advantage of this for the rest of the game. Don't get me wrong, there's going to be turns that you might feel like you could have double artifact or double enchantment, but that's probably not going to be the case because most of the time you just rather creature enchantment or creature artifact, and you'll get around this. This will straight up shut down certain strategies and be a thorn on your ramp opponent's side, because ramp opponents, which are the opponents I think that are going to beat this deck the most, they're going to want to double ramp or ramp into non-creature spells a lot. I think this idea of ramping into creatures has long since passed, especially at this power level. Don't get me wrong, there's still scenarios where they're going to just smash a giant creature down and look at you and go, what are you going to do? There's also a lot of scenarios they want to ramp into several draw engines or several ramp engines, or just cast several ramp spells in a row, and Deafening Silence is going to say no to that, all for the low price of 1 mana. I've talked about how good this is, let's keep moving. Here's the contentious one, Drannith Magistrate. I really do think when you are approaching the higher end of power in white, you should heavily be considering this. Do not play this as a card that's going to win you the game. Play this as a card that's going to attract removal and shut down some of your opponents. I would actually advocate half the time to let one of your opponents already have their commander out, because then you've got someone who probably enjoys the Drannith Magistrate. A Drannith Magistrate enjoyer, if you may, on your side when you have two opponents who probably don't like you very much. And you've never quite enjoyed a Drannith Magistrate when you've had it out and one of your opponents destroys another opponent's commander and goes, now you've joined us under Drannith Magistrate. That has been something I've seen more than once that has made me go, this is a phenomenal card. So unless your friends are going to kick you out of your play group, I would really recommend playing this card. Another stacks card that I think works well here, especially with the life gain theme, is Blind Obedience. Blind Obedience has been reprinted a lot. It is a very strong card, and I really do recommend being able to play this at any time. For those who don't know, the Extort, the black mana symbol, is a part of the reminder text. Imagine this little part does not exist. Actually, here you go. This is what the card actually looks like, and therefore, because of that, you can put this in a mono white deck. This is a really good mana sink that lets you spend a little mana here and there, and artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped are just meaningful. Like, just compare this to Ghostly Prison. I believe Blind Obedience will do a better job at lessening the damage you take than Ghostly Prison a lot of the time. The exception, of course, being if you have an opponent that is a token producing deck, whereas the former is better. But here, I think generally you'll be happier with this effect, and your opponents will be taking advantage of it just as much. You might say, well, my opponents aren't attacking other opponents because of the Ghostly Prison, so how is this better? Your opponents are probably going to be capitalizing on each other's tapped creatures just as much, so you're not losing that much. Something else that I think you can really play in this deck is Flare of Fortitude. This came up earlier with your Temple is under attack, but it really does matter that board clears are very strong against you, mainly because in the sense that outside of targeted removal, such as Swords Plowshares and Grasp of Fate, Doomblade effects, it's really hard to kill your bigger creatures, so you need to buy yourself some other ways to protect it. Now, we already have Ephemerate and the like. Flare of Fortitude is just really nice of being able to completely shut down certain board clear effects or certain removal spells. That's not even including the fact that this is a fog, this is gives you hexproof. This is just a very powerful protection spell that can be cast for free. And free spells are good spells. All right, we're now in the section that I'm going to be including multiple cards per slide, let's say, because I think there's certain types of cards that I think you could very much so benefit with. I alluded this to long ago that MDFCs were on the list, and it's Razor Grass, Ambush, and Witch Enchanter. The Modern Horizon 3 MDFCs are just really strong, and they cost so little to put in your deck that, especially in a monocolored deck, I think you should play both every single time. Razor Grass Ambush is okay removal. It's not great removal, but it is removal. And Witch Enchanter is actually particularly good because disenchant effects are just very strong in Commander right now and always. And since both of these are just lands in the end of the day, the opportunity cost is low. Likewise, as suggested in the last video, and I will suggest till the end of days, our Thalias are very good. I just saw today that they've been reprinted, so at least Thalia Heretic Cathar, which is the more expensive one, has been reprinted into Innistrad Remastered with slightly cool art, but I do like the classics. As the last deck builder said, they agree with me that the correct art is the original art of Thalia. But playing both Thalias is very, very easy in mono white. Both of them slow down your opponents in different ways. Fantastic, won't continue talking about them. Same idea here, the Giver and Mother of Runes combination, very, very strong, protects your creatures, you know what's up. This is something I wanted to include that was a little interesting to me, and it was looking at the Elesh Norns. Elesh Norn has always been a very, very strong card, and every version of her is particularly powerful. Notably, her final version, the Elesh Norn Saga, is the one I don't see and is generally the cheapest one. I still, $5 for that art, that's really, really nice. I still think it's rather good. Any of these are easy to play. I know thematically they don't fit in as much. They are not angels, they are not humans, they can't be reanimated. They also aren't Eldrazi, so they don't flavorfully fit in, but they're all so, so good. I would probably put Mom, Mother of Machines, into here because it has that stacks ability of shutting down your opponent's cards while enabling not all of your cards, but some of your cards, which to me is already very, very strong. Grand Cenobite could be a curve topper that you could replace one of your other very high mana cards for, because I have talked for years about this card, about just how good that board wipe-like ability is, and I will continue to talk about it, so particularly good. And especially earlier, I did mention tokens and go wide strategies, and Elesh Norn is a very, very good solution to that problem. Our final Elesh Norn is interesting. I've never quite used it, particularly as it is built to be a very specific kind of deck. You know, its final ability does wipe your board from other creatures, and you know, but she is an army in a can. She will you can easily just like cycle her by having mana, because once she flips back to her main side, you can just reactivate this ability, sacrifice 3 other creatures, and flip her, which I do really like, but I think fits in the least. You can make it work. I'll leave that up to you, but I think middle Elesh Norn is worth considering. Coming to the end, Split Up was a card that's been seeing play in other formats that's really caught my eye as a 3-mana board clear. I did want to mention it here just as something to think about. I'm not going to say whether or not it is very, very good, but it is worth noting. Finally, coming to the end, Swords of Plowshares and Path of Exile are notably missing. I really do recommend you play these cards. I cannot recommend them enough. Right after that, we have Stroke of Midnight as well. These are the main removal spells that I would advocate for. I do have one more after that, but this is just something that I have to bring up every now and then, is that games are won off of the back of removal, or are not won because of removal. So thinking to, I've posted, so I've been on MTG Mutz's channel, and I've been in videos where we play things. And I read the comments on those videos, and people are sometimes, they mistake a difference in power level to an access to board control or interaction. So games where it feels like you watch someone and you go, wow, that person just steamrolled the table, that deck is way stronger than everyone else's, is often more to do with the fact that no one stopped them. And the main way we stop these opponents is by interaction, is by removal. Like there's just situations where if all my opponents don't have removal, I'm just gonna win the game. And in my power level, that's because people have spent their removal, or people have been you know, their hands have been discarded, or they've been stacked out of access to their removal, and they've run out of draw cards. But it would be just as powerful for me if they didn't play removal, right? At lower power levels, people not playing removal is what gets them into situations where one deck just stomps all over them. So, all this to say, Swords of Plowshares, Path to Exile, I know they're kind of boring cards at this point. You need to play them. They are so, so strong. You're in white. You need to take advantage of the fact that you have the strongest removal in the color pie. Stroke of Midnight, likewise, is very, very close. There's also the one that destroys any permanent and gives a 3/3. I think right now at this power level, I prefer Stroke of Midnight, though your opponents might use the Beast Within version to destroy your lands. And if your opponents have likewise very, very powerful lands, you should be considering that one instead. Finally, the last card I wanted to suggest was Karmic Justice. When it comes to destroying target permanents, when it comes to permanent control, Karmic Justice is a card that comes and goes on my mind, but right now, it's especially in this kind of deck catching my eye, because Karmic Justice is much better than Ghostly Prison, but does a Ghostly Prison impression for your permanents. Ghostly Prison taxes your opponents and their time and their energy in order to attack you. Karmic Justice taxes your opponents to interact with you. And as long as Karmic Justice is not the strongest card on your battlefield, you're going to probably get more than one activation or more than one trigger off of it. And that's usually my bar for Karmic Justice. This deck is just strong enough that I believe that if you slam Karmic Justice down and you have like Esper Sentinel out, or you have a Stax piece out, your opponents are going to be particularly... actually, it says non-creature. Okay, so not Esper Sentinel. It would have to be one of your enchantment base, like Deafening Silence out, and you drop Karmic Justice. Some opponents are incentivized to get rid of the Deafening Silence, and that allows immediately for you to get card parity, let's say, by taking out something that they have. All right, that's everything. I hope this video was helpful to you. I really do like the direction the deck is going in, and I've kind of, through my additions and through my my critiques, I should say, I've been trying to pull the deck what I think is the stronger direction for it. That's not necessarily what you might want to do, but I think the deck has already gone pretty far in that direction, and kind of solidifying it in that position could be fun. Otherwise, it is really well built together. I do really like it, and I don't think there's much more we could do with a deck like this. The only steps above this would probably putting more tutors. I'm thinking of like Ranger Captain of Eos. I'm thinking of... Does White have tutors? Yeah, I'm thinking of more of an equipment package and Steel Shaper's Gift. I'm thinking of Stoneforge Mystic, those kind of cards. And I'm thinking obviously of just powerful cards like Smothering Tithe. And after that, just putting fast mana in, which I just don't think is necessary. I think the deck is pretty close to being finished unless we want to retheme it, and I will leave that up to you. Thank you so much, Erica, for continuing to send the decks. It's really fun to see a deck that I looked at a while back, and good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.